Hey students, welcome back. This is Taurus, elbow bump. How are you? Are you doing okay? Is your family okay? Remember, if you need anything, please send me an email and I'm happy to help in whatever way I can. So lucky you, you get to hear my voice for another lecture. But the best part is we will be actually working on our final project in small videos. Yay! This is the second in a series of videos that will help you get through the final statistics project. Let's go back to the instructions of the final project and see if we can maybe start to cross off some of the stuff we did already. So it says, in this project, you will apply all the steps of null hypothesis statistical testing using the U.S. housing data to answer the question, is there a statistically significant difference between the mean rental values in a city and state between 2 months? Your task is to present your findings in a statistical report which includes tables, figures, and references. Approximately 4 to 5 pages excluding title page and references. The report must adhere to APA guidelines. Each student will be assigned a unique question. Although you may have different questions, you can work together to help one another through the process. This project will involve several parts. Part 1, selecting a state and receiving your year-month assignments. So that's what we did yesterday. We went ahead and we opened up the Google Sheet link for the U.S. housing data and we copied it into one of our own spreadsheets. So I'm going to go ahead and take this and mark that off. So we did that part already and I'm just going to highlight that in a dark gray. Okay. And then it says you may select the state you would like to use for your project. Column B, once you've made your selection, please email me with this information and I will assign the months and years you will compare. So we did that as well. We're just going to pretend that I okayed my 2 months for California. So if you recall, I had selected California as my state, and I selected January 2014 and January 2015 for the months that I want to compare. Cool. Great. Okay. So we're done with part 1, receiving month and state assignments. Now let's go to part 2. Now this is when we're really going to start intertwining the steps of the statistical process with steps of the null hypothesis statistical testing. It says, Part 2, Introduction, Writing Null and Alternate Hypotheses, Cleaning Data, Physical Description, Testing for Normality, Preliminary Comparison. Okay, so it says, write a brief introduction, 1 to 2 sentences to frame your question. Write the null and alternate hypotheses for your question. Use both sentences and statistical notation to write your hypotheses. Delete all variables that are not relevant for your question. For example, if you're studying rental values in Illinois for January 2014 and February 2014, then you should delete data for all other states and dates. Check your data for missingness. For example, if some of the cells are blank, how will you address the issue? Write a paragraph on the changes you made to the spreadsheet and why. And remember to include, how did you obtain this data? How many original variables were there? Why did you delete some of the data? How many missing values were there? How did you deal with this issue? How many variables and cases remain for analysis? Perform all normality tests on both date variables. You should perform numerical and visual normality tests on both variables. Compare mean and median, skewness, kurtosis, shape of histogram, shape of box plot. And QQ plot is optional. Then write a paragraph on the descriptive statistics and normality tests for each date variable. Remember to include descriptive statistic values, mean, median, standard deviation, skewness, kurtosis. Write the process for your normality tests and your conclusion about the data suitability for inference testing. Conduct a preliminary regression analysis with the 2 date variables. Remember, without more information, this regression can only describe whether a relationship exists. You will need the statistical test to find significant differences. Describe the shape of the scatter plot and identify any outliers. If there are outliers, what type of outlier are they, and do you have any explanation for them? Does the scatter plot show positive, negative, or no association? What is the correlation coefficient? Explain what that indicates about the relationship. Determine if there is a linear relationship between your variables by examining the scatter plot and correlation coefficient. Is there a linear relationship? determine the linear equation, how strong a relationship do these variables have. If there is no relationship, discuss why you think there's no relationship. Okay, so just because that took me a whole 3 minutes to read, you can tell that part 2 is a big chunk of the work, okay? And really, when we look at this, we've got to write our hypothesis, right? So that's the first step of null hypothesis testing. And then we've got to go through and check our assumptions, which is in all the prepare stage, the gather data prepare stage, which I often told you is kind of like the longest part. So we're going to go ahead and start looking at some of this, and I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how you can start to write your report without actually having to sit down and just strictly write the report. So let's start off by opening a document, and we're going to start by, of course, the very first part of the statistical process, which is we're going to start with our question. We're going to identify the population and sample and the parameters and statistics, and we're going to write our null and alternate hypotheses. So let's start with that. When I start writing up a report, I usually don't start writing paragraphs. I usually start getting data and then I kind of bring everything together. That's my process. So first thing in the statistical process is to start with the question, and we've got to identify the population, the sample, and any parameters and statistics I may have. So here I have a Google Doc that I will link below with my writing. So the first part is the question, and I'm just going to copy that directly from the information that you were given, and go ahead and not make this bold or italicized. And I'm going to start with, is there a statistically significant difference between the mean rental values in, and then here I'm going to go ahead and put in the state of California. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and write this first month, January 2014, and then also change this to the second month, which is January 2015. And again, I'm going to make sure that there's no underlines or anything so that I have my question. So here's my question that I have here. Okay, and it says to frame your question. So I've written the question, but I haven't really done any brief introduction. I'll go back and do that later. If I were going to identify the population, really think about what is it that we are wanting to learn? We want to learn about the mean rental values in California between these 2 months. So the population would be all rental values in California, and the sample would be what I provided. Okay, and we don't have a parameter to compare. We just have the statistics that we're going to find when we start doing our descriptive statistics. So the parameter is unknown, and the statistics will come from us. So I've identified the population, the sample, the parameter, and the statistics we're going to find once we start looking at the mean, median, mode, etc. Okay, great. So now we've got to write the hypotheses for the question. Okay, write the null and alternate hypotheses for my question. And I need to do this both in sentences and statistical notation. What does this say? Is there a statistically significant difference between the mean rental values? So it's not asking whether there's been an increase or a decrease. It's just looking for difference. The null in this case is that there is no statistical significant difference between the mean rental values in California between January 2014 and January 2015. The null, remember, you're just assuming there's no change whatsoever. Everything stays the same. So we're going to write that out very easily. Here we go. Okay, had that ready for us to go. The null hypothesis is that there is no statistically significant difference between the mean rental values in California between January 2014 and January 2015. So if that is the null, then the alternate has to be that there is. So I'm going to go ahead and just take this right here and copy it, and that there is a statistically significant difference between the mean rental values in California between January 2014 and January 2015. So the null is that there is not, and the alternate is that it is. The next thing we need to do is write this up using the mathematical notation. Writing the null and alternate hypotheses using Google Docs or Word is different depending on whether you're working on Google Docs or Word. Since this one I'm working on Google Docs, it doesn't have a really good program that will just let you start writing mathematical equations easily that's already added on this. So you can go into add-ons and actually get this add-on, which is free, called Hypatia. I would say stay away from MathType because even though it is a really good program, it costs money. So avoid that one when Hypatia is just as good and you can have it for free. Now, I'm going to go ahead and make a different video on how to use Hypatia so that you can write your null and alternate hypotheses and get kind of in the hang of that. I'm not going to do that here, but I will link it in the description box, and I'll also put a card so that you can click on that later. So that's how I would write my null is the mean, the population mean of the rentals is the capital X, it's the big X, and that's January 14 is the same as the mean in January 2015. And here we have that the mean is different in January 14 than it is in January 15. And we would say is the same by using an equal sign and is different by using the not equal sign. And it looks really great using the notation. So we're done with that part. Let me go ahead and pull up our assignment, and we can mark off that we wrote the null and alternate hypotheses using both sentences and statistical notation. The next step says delete all variables that are not relevant for your question. For example, if you're studying rental values in Illinois, January 2014 and February 2014, then you should delete data for all other states and dates. It sounds like we're going to start cleaning the data. So I want to go ahead and copy the information, the entire spreadsheet, into a program that I want to use. And I think I'll use Excel this time. I'll see if maybe I can do it again with another program. But I'm going to go ahead and use Excel this time. And the first thing I need to do is I need to copy the whole set. So we're going to go ahead and take everything, and I can do that by just clicking again on this top left corner of the Google Sheets, right click and copy, and then I'm going to go ahead and put it into a clean brand new Excel file. So here's my clean brand new Excel file. If I press Control V, and take a minute to think, see the little swirly blue thing right there? And boom, okay? Lots and lots of data is in through here. Because I know I'm going to be doing some cleaning, I'm going to go ahead and just save this into my Dropbox so that I can work this okay. So now it's saved. Now I have this data that I can start working with. And I told you before that I'm going to work with California and the months of January 2014 and January 2015. But all this other data can go. When you first get a data set, you have to make sure that you trace all the things that you do to this, so that if anybody were to pick up this data set and try to reproduce your analysis, they would be able to do so. What I like to do is I like to save the original data set in one of the tabs down here. And then once I get the clean data, I like to copy it and put it into another tab so that if something were to go wrong, I still have the original data set. So I always keep the original data set just in case. First thing we need to do, since we need to keep track of this, is we need to know kind of like what was in this. And what I usually do is when I'm working, I just have like a notebook or a piece of paper that I keep all this information handy. But since I can't show you my notes, I'm going to go ahead and just jot some things down in this notepad here that I feel are important. So the first thing I need to jot down is like who gave me this data. So this data was provided by me. So data provided by Professor Torres on Google Sheets. Okay, so that I know where I got it. And you might think, well, where else are you going to get it? But just, again, think of if this were actually your job, if your job was cleaning data and putting things in order, you might be working on several different projects. So you want to not leave anything to chance. You know, you just want it written down. Anything can happen. People should be able to pick up your stuff and see where you're at. Okay, so the next thing I kind of want to know is like what's in here. So I want to know what's in here. So let's start by counting how many variables there are. And I can do that pretty easily just by going over here and clicking on one of the rows. And if you look down here at the very bottom, it'll say count, and then it'll also say numerical count. So it's counting, this first number, it says count, it's counting everything in the top row, whether it's a word or it has a number in it. And the second one is counting just stuff that has numbers. So count anything, numerical count, just stuff with numbers. And if you notice here in column A and B, we have city and state. It makes sense that we need those two columns, we need those two variables. So it says that we have 85 total variables. So the original set had 85 variables. So now I need to know how many cases were provided. And I can find the cases by counting up the rows, because the rows are the cases. Now I have to be a little bit careful because the very first row here is a header. So that doesn't provide any information about the cases. That just happens to be the title for that particular column. So I need to, whatever I end up doing, I need to subtract that one row. So I'm going to go ahead and just click on this first column. If I go down here, I can see that there are 3,191 counts, but I need to subtract one because the very first row is the title or the header for the column. So I have 3,190 cases. So I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to continue this 3,190 cases. The last step is to figure out how many observations we have. So we want to know for each one of the cases and each one of the months, what are the different rental values. So we want the intersections of the state and the month. So we want, like, for example, C2 is an observation. D2 is an observation. So these are the observations we want. So in order to do this, we can do this actually pretty easily. I can go ahead and click on the very first observation that I have in the second row, because remember the first row is a header. And I can actually just hit Control-Shift-Right arrow together, and it will highlight everything from that first row that I clicked on all the way to the end of the data. Then I can do Control-Shift-End, and it will take me all the way to the very bottom of the data. And if you notice here, where it has numerical count, we want to know how many cells have data in them. Then we can look over here where it says numerical count, and we see that there are 252,675 observations. So I can write down my notes that I have 252,675 observations. Remember that we decided to keep our original data set so that if there were any problems, we had the original data set in one of the tabs. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to make another copy of this and keep it separate and just not touch the original data set. I can do this the same way as when I was copying Google Sheets to put into Excel, and I can click on this same top left button, right click and copy. And then down here, you'll see that there's a little plus sign, and that little plus sign will add another tab. So I'll hit plus sign, and I'll hit cleaning data sheet. I'll click on A1, and then I can paste it in just like that. And boom, now I have my original data set that I'm not going to touch, and I'm going to have my clean data set that I can start working with. So if there's a problem, I always have an extra copy that I didn't touch. So we did a lot of Excel today, and I think this would be a really good time for me to stop and pick up in the next video with starting to actually go through and start deleting all the variables and all the cases that are no longer necessary. So what's the big idea? Today's big idea is that you need to keep your original data set safe. You might need it in the future. Make sure that you document the number of variables, cases, and observations in your original set so you can trace how you modified the original set. So that's it for today. With that said, don't forget to check your emails, check Blackboard, do your homework, and subscribe to this channel. Even better, hit that notification bell so you know when there are new videos for this course. Okay, this is your teacher Tora saying stay safe, and I will be waiting to give you a virtual elbow bump in the next video. Ciao!